The acrid smell of gunpowder clung to the desert air, thicker than the dust settling over the smoldering ruins of the Waystone Ranch. Arlen Vance stumbled from the burning barn, his ears ringing, the taste of betrayal sharp as copper on his tongue. He'd trusted them, trusted him, and that trust had just gotten his family killed. Hours earlier, the ranch had been alive with the familiar sounds of a working homestead. Arlen, a man built more for quiet strength than loud boasts, checked the fence line with his son, Kyle, a lanky 16-year-old mirroring his father's steady gaze. Inside the sturdy ranch house, Arlen's wife, Serafina, hummed while kneading bread, the scent mingling with the leather and hay drifting in through the open windows. Life was hard, Scrabble, but good, built on years of sweat and trust, especially the trust placed in Silas Rourke. Silas wasn't just Arlen's foreman. He was his brother-in-arms from the turbulent Iron River skirmishes near the Whisper Peaks. They'd saved each other's hides more times than either could count, shared water canteens when the Sunscar wastes seemed endless, and pooled their meager earnings to buy the Waystone land together. When Serafina came into Arlen's life, Silas stood as his best man. When Kyle was born, Silas was the first to hold him after Arlen. He was family, bound tighter than blood. That's why Arlen didn't hesitate when Silas rode in that afternoon, his face grim beneath his worn Stetson Peak hat.
"Trouble brewing, Arlen," Silas had rasped, dismounting swiftly. "Rider came in from Dust Vale Post. Bunch of rustlers, teeth gang spotted heading this way. Bracken himself, they say." Torrin Bracken was a name that chilled the blood. A merciless cattle baron whose expanding empire crushed smaller ranches like bugs. Arlen had stubbornly refused Bracken's offers to buy the Waystone, which sat on a crucial water source feeding into the Azure Basin. Arlen's hand instinctively went to the worn walnut grip of his coat. "How many, Silas?" "Enough," Silas replied, his eyes darting towards the barn. 15, maybe 20. They mean business, Arlen. We gotta fortify, get Serafina and Kale somewhere safe, then make our stand. They'll hit at dusk. Count on it." The plan formed quickly, born of years of shared danger. Silas would take Serafina and Kale to the old Ghost Canyon line shack, hidden, defensible. Arlen would stay with the remaining two hands, Jeb and Old Man Harlow, to hold the main buildings, laying traps and setting up crossfire positions. It felt desperate, but Silas's urgency was infectious. Arlen hugged his family fiercely, promising to join him soon, his eyes locking with Silas's. "Keep 'em safe, brother." "With my life, Arlen," Silas vowed, his hand gripping Arlen's shoulder with familiar strength. "You hold here. We'll be waiting." As Silas rode out with Serafina and Kale in the buckboard, a strange unease flickered in Arlen's gut, quickly dismissed as fear for his family. He, Jeb, and Harlow worked frantically, barricading windows, piling sacks of grain for cover, priming their rifles. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, the prelude to violence.
Dusk bled into twilight. Crickets chirped. Then, silence. An unnatural, heavy silence. Arlen peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. No sign of riders. Had Silas been wrong? Had they gotten Serafina and Kale to safety in time? Relief warred with tension. The explosion shattered the stillness. It wasn't Bracken's men storming the gate. It came from inside the barn. A deafening roar, a flash of light that seared Arlen's eyes, and then the world erupted in splinters and flame. The carefully placed sacks of grain meant as cover became shrapnel. Arlen was thrown backwards, crashing into the wall, the breath knocked out of him. He saw Jeb caught in the blast, a brief, horrifying silhouette before disappearing in smoke and debris. Old Man Harlow's choked cry was cut short by the collapsing roof beam. Stunned, ears screaming, Arlen crawled through choking smoke, the heat blistering his skin. He heard shouts now, but not the chaotic yells of attackers. These were orders, crisp and cold. And then a voice cut through the crackling inferno, a voice he knew as well as his own, now laced with a chilling satisfaction. "Check the house. Make sure it's done. Bracken wants no loose ends." Silas. The betrayal hit Arlen like a physical blow, harder than the explosion. Silas hadn't gone to protect Serafina and Kale, he'd led them straight into a trap, or worse. And he'd sabotaged the barn, turning their defenses into a death trap. The trust of 20 years evaporated, replaced by a void colder than a mountain stream, quickly filling with molten rage. Somehow, bleeding, burned, and half-deaf, Arlen dragged himself out of the collapsing house. He saw figures moving in the dancing shadows cast by the burning buildings, Bracken's hard-faced riders, efficient and brutal. And there, standing tall amidst the chaos he'd orchestrated, directing the final destruction with calm authority, was Silas Rourke. He was handing a heavy money pouch to a hulking man Arlen recognized as Grist, Bracken's chief enforcer. Payment for treachery. Arlen's hand fumbled for his Colt. It was gone, lost in the blast. His rifle was buried under rubble. He was weaponless, broken, watching the life he built reduced to ash by the man he'd called brother. Silas turned, his gaze sweeping the ruins. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Arlen's through the smoke and flame. There was no remorse, only a flicker of surprise that Arlen still lived, quickly masked by cold indifference. Silas nodded curtly to Grist, who raised his rifle. Arlen didn't wait. He threw himself sideways into the choking cover of the smoke, rolling down a shallow gully behind the corral. A bullet kicked dirt where he'd been a heartbeat before. He heard Silas bark, "Find him! He can't have gotten far!" But the flames were spreading, the heat intensifying, and Bracken's men, their primary task of destruction complete, were more interested in looting what little remained unburned than chasing a presumed dead man into the dark. Arlen crawled, every movement agony, driven by a single, burning purpose that eclipsed the pain. Find them. Make Silas pay. He didn't know how long he crawled, guided by the fading glow of the fire behind him, until he collapsed near a stand of weeping-spined cacti. Dawn found him half-conscious, parched, his clothes charred and bloody. The image of Silas's cold betrayal seared into his mind alongside the flames that consumed his home. He forced himself up, drinking greedily from a tiny, muddy seep. Survival was the first step. Revenge would be the journey. He knew the Ghost Canyon shack was likely compromised, a death sentence if he went straight there. Silas would expect it. Instead, Arlen turned towards the desolate expanse of the Sunscar wastes. He needed distance, time to heal, and a weapon. His only advantage was that they thought him dead. The trek was brutal. The sun was a merciless hammer, the sand like ground glass in his boots. Hunger gnawed, thirst was a constant torment, and his wounds throbbed with every step. He survived on sheer will, chewing bitter devil's root for its scant moisture, catching lizards with trembling hands. He thought of Serafina's laugh, bright as desert bells. He saw Kael's determined frown as he tried to master a lasso, and he saw Silas's face, the easy grin replaced by that chilling indifference. The rage kept him moving when his body screamed to stop. After days that blurred into a haze of pain and determination, Arlen stumbled upon the outskirts of Flickertown, a ramshackle mining settlement clinging to the edge of the wastes. It was a place of hard faces and harder luck, perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. He traded the only thing of value he had left, his father's silver pocket watch, miraculously undamaged in his vest pocket, for a meal, a bath in a rusty trough, and the basic medical supplies.
He also traded for a gun, an old single-action peacemaker revolver, well-worn but functional, and a box of cartridges. The weight of it on his hip felt like the first step back towards humanity and towards vengeance. He kept his head down, using the name Jonas Reed, a drifter down on his luck. He took back-breaking work at the Lucky Vein mine, hauling ore. The labor was punishing, but it rebuilt his strength and provided a few meager coins. Nights were spent cleaning the gun, practicing his draw in the dim light of his rented shack, the motion slowly returning, fueled by memory and hate. He listened intently in the crowded smoky saloon, the dusty gourd, picking up fragments of news. Word of the Waystone Ranch burning reached Flickertown, presented as a tragic clash with Bracken's men. No mention of survivors, no mention of Silas Rourke's role. Silas, it seemed, had seamlessly integrated into Bracken's organization, rewarded for his service. He was now Bracken's trusted lieutenant, overseeing the newly acquired Waystone water rights and expanding Bracken's herds onto the fertile land. The betrayal was complete, sanitized by distance and Bracken's power. Arlen also listened for whispers about survivors. Had anyone seen a woman and a boy? Descriptions of Seraphina's fiery red hair and Cale's lanky frame yielded nothing but shakes of the head and muttered condolences. Hope, a fragile thing, began to wither, replaced by a colder, harder certainty. He was likely alone. The only family he had left was the debt owed to Silas Rourke.
One evening, a new face appeared in the dusty gourd. A woman, travel-stained but holding herself with a quiet intensity. She wore practical trail clothes, a lightning bolt repeater rifle leaning against the bar beside her. Her name, Arlen overheard, was Elira. She wasn't mining. She was asking quiet questions about Bracken's operations, about land seizures, about missing families. Her eyes, a sharp, observant gray, scanned the room, lingering briefly on Arlen, as if sensing a kindred spirit nursing a deep wound. Arlen watched her, wary. Was she Bracken's, a lawman, or something else? He saw her pay for information with silver, saw the cautious nods she received, saw the flicker of anger in her eyes when a drunk miner made a crude remark about Bracken crushing squatters. She handled the rebuke herself, calm but firm, leaving the man nursing a bruised ego and a sore wrist. Later, as Arlen headed back to his shack, a shadow detached itself from the alley wall. Elira stepped into the moonlight. "Jonas Reed?" she asked, her voice low. Arlen's hand hovered near his peacemaker. "Who's asking?" "Someone who knows that name ain't the one you were born with," she said evenly, her gaze steady. "Someone who also knows what Torrin Bracken took and what Silas Rourke did to give it to him." Arlen froze, the night air suddenly icy. How? Panic warred with suspicion. "Don't know what you're talking about, ma'am."
"I saw the fire," Elira stated simply. "From the ridge, 2 days after. I tracked the raiders back towards Bracken's main spread, the Iron Crown Ranch. Saw Rourke riding point with Grist. Saw the look on his face. Satisfaction. Like a man who'd won big." She took a step closer. "My brother had a spread near Shadow Pass. Bracken wanted it. Rourke was the snake who slithered in and convinced him to sell cheap, right before Bracken's accidental brush fire cleared the land anyway. My brother didn't make it out." Arlen studied her face. The grief was real, etched alongside the hardness. The hatred for Silas mirrored his own. "What do you want, Elira?" "Same thing you do, Arlen Vance," she said, using his real name deliberately. "To see Silas Rourke broken. To see Bracken's empire crack. Alone, we're just 2 more ghosts Bracken creates. Together, maybe we make a difference. Maybe we get justice." It was a dangerous alliance. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Yet the sheer audacity of her knowing his identity, her shared enemy, and the cold practicality in her eyes resonated. He needed eyes, information, resources he didn't have. He gave a single, curt nod. Talk. Over the next weeks, a fragile partnership formed. Elira proved invaluable. She knew the territory, had contacts in settlements Bracken hadn't yet crushed, and possessed a sharp tactical mind. She confirmed Silas was indeed Bracken's right hand, feared and efficient, consolidating power. Bracken himself remained a distant, powerful figure, operating from the heavily fortified Iron Crown Ranch.
Arlen focused on regaining his strength and skills. He practiced relentlessly with the peacemaker, the draw becoming smooth and fast again, the kick of the weapon a familiar echo of his past life. He honed his tracking, his horsemanship, on a sturdy duel bought with hard-earned coin. The drifter, Jonas Reed, slowly faded, replaced by a harder, quieter version of Arlen Vance, a man with fire in his eyes and ice in his heart. Their first move was subtle. Elira had learned of a small rancher, Dern Halder, holding out against Bracken's pressure near the Whisper Peaks. Bracken, through Silas, planned to encourage him by stampeding Bracken's own cattle through Halder's carefully tended fields, destroying his winter feed and forcing him off. Arlen and Elira intercepted the plan. Under cover of darkness, they spooked the herd before they reached Halder's land, diverting the panicked cattle back towards a barren stretch of Bracken's own holding. The next day, Silas arrived to find chaos, his own fences trampled, valuable cattle scattered, and Halder's fields untouched. The rancher, emboldened by the inexplicable reprieve, stood defiant. Silas's frustration was palpable, a crack in his usual cold efficiency. It was a small victory, a pebble thrown, but it felt good. It proved Silas wasn't invincible.
They escalated cautiously. The intercepted supply wagons bound for remote Bracken outposts, scattering the contents or spooking the teams, causing delays and minor losses. They left no calling card, nothing to directly point to them, just whispers of bad luck and growing unease among Bracken's men. Silas grew increasingly paranoid, tightening security, sending out more patrols. He knew someone was working against him, but he couldn't see the enemy. Arlen watched from a distance once, through a spyglass, seeing Silas berate his men, the smooth facade showing strain. The sight fueled Arlen's resolve. One night, Elira returned to their hidden camp in a box canyon with urgent news. "Got word from a swamper at the Silver Saddle Saloon near Iron Crown," she whispered, eyes gleaming. "Rourke's moving a big payroll tomorrow. Gold dust, coin, wages for all Bracken's crews. He's taking it himself, with a heavy guard, through Rattler's Gorge." Rattler's Gorge was a treacherous, narrow pass, perfect for an ambush. It was also incredibly risky. Robbing Bracken's payroll was a direct attack, guaranteed to bring the full force of his wrath down upon them. Arlen felt the familiar cold fire ignite. This was more than a pebble. This could be a boulder. "Too many guards," Arlen stated, thinking tactically. "Even with the gorge, we'd be outgunned 5-1. "Not if we even the odds," Elira countered, pulling out a rough map. "See this side canyon halfway through? Known as the Whisper, unstable. One well-placed charge brings down a rockfall, blocks the gorge behind the lead riders, splits the group. A dangerous, audacious plan. It relied on precise timing and a lot of luck, but the potential payoff was immense. Cripple Bracken's operations, hit him where it hurt most, his money, and humiliate Silas." Arlen met Elira's gaze. The shared hatred for Silas burned bright. "We need blasting powder and a very fast fuse."
Acquiring the powder discreetly was a nerve-wracking task, managed through Elira's shadowy contacts. They spent a tense night setting the charge deep within the Whisper, concealing it beneath loose scree, running a long, camouflaged fuse to a vantage point overlooking the gorge entrance. Dawn found them concealed among the high rocks, hearts pounding, watching the empty pass below. Just after midday, dust announced the approach. Silas Rourke rode at the head, flanked by 2 hard-looking riders. Behind them came a sturdy wagon, driven by another man, with 4 more outriders flanking it, and 3 more bringing up the rear. 10 men total, heavily armed. Silas scanned the high cliffs, alert, hand resting near his gun. He knew the danger of the gorge. Arlen held his breath, finger near the trigger of the peacemaker, not for shooting, but for the intense focus it demanded. Elira crouched beside him, her rifle ready, her eyes fixed on the wagon trundling into the narrowest part of the pass. They waited, letting the lead riders and the wagon pass the hidden side canyon. Then the rear guards entered the kill zone. "Now," Arlen breathed. Elira struck a match, touched it to the fuse. It sparked and hissed, snaking rapidly down the cliff face towards the whisper. Seconds stretched like hours. The wagon was almost clear. The rear guards were directly below the side canyon. Silas, near the front, turned, perhaps sensing something. His shout lost in the sudden, thunderous roar.
The explosion wasn't massive, but it was perfectly placed. Tons of rock and dirt cascaded down from the whisper, crashing onto the gorge floor with a sound like the earth splitting. Dust billowed up in an immense cloud. The rear 3 guards and their horses vanished instantly beneath the slide. The impact spooked the wagon team. The horses reared, screaming, causing the wagon to lurch sideways, blocking the narrow path. The riders in the middle were thrown into chaos, horses bucking, men shouting in panic. Silas, near the front, wheeled his horse around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Ambush! Take cover! Return fire!" He dove from his saddle, seeking shelter behind a large boulder as bullets suddenly whined off the rocks around him. Arlen and Elira, from their high perch, opened fire. They weren't aiming to kill indiscriminately. They aimed at the horses, at the wagon wheels, at the rocks near the men to keep them pinned down. Chaos reigned. 2 more Bracken men went down, horses shot from under them. Another clutched his arm, screaming. The wagon driver lay stunned beside the overturned wagon. Silas and the 2 lead riders, along with 1 unhorsed man who'd scrambled forward, were trapped near the front, separated from the wagon and the payroll by the rockfall and the withering fire from above. "Get that gold," Arlen yelled to Elira over the gunfire. He laid down covering fire as she scrambled down a hidden goat path towards the blocked gorge. Her target was the strongbox bolted to the wagon bed. The surviving Bracken men near the wagon were disoriented, taking cover from the rockslide debris and the unexpected attack. Elira moved like a shadow, reaching the overturned wagon. She fired 2 quick shots near a man trying to crawl towards the strongbox, sending him scrambling back. Using a small pry bar, she worked frantically at the lock.
Silas, realizing the target, risked a shot upwards towards Arlen's position. The bullet ricocheted close. Arlen returned fire, forcing Silas back behind his boulder. "Rourke!" Arlen roared, the name tearing from his throat, raw with years of pain. "Does Bracken pay well for burning families?" Silas froze for a fraction of a second, his eyes widening slightly. He hadn't recognized the voice before, distorted by rage and distance. Now he did. Shock, pure and unguarded, flickered across his face. "Vance!" he shouted back, disbelief warring with fury. "You're supposed to be dead!" "Disappointed?" Arlen called down, firing again. Below, Elira gave a triumphant shout. The strongbox lid sprung open. She grabbed heavy sacks of gold dust and coin, stuffing them into a sturdy canvas bag she'd brought. "It's over, Silas!" Arlen yelled. "Your luck just ran out!" Silas's shock hardened into vicious resolve. He signaled to his 2 remaining capable men near him. "Flank him! Left ridge! Go!" The 2 men broke cover, scrambling up the steep sides of the gorge further down, trying to get an angle on Arlen's position. Arlen shifted his fire, pinning them down as they climbed. Below, Elira slung the heavy bag over her shoulder. "Got it! Let's go!" she yelled. Arlen fired 1 last volley towards Silas's position and the climbing men, then turned to follow Elira down the escape path she'd used. They scrambled, rocks skittering underfoot, the shouts and sporadic gunfire from the gorge echoing behind them. They reached their waiting horses, hidden in a thicket beyond the gorge rim, and spurred them hard away from the chaos. They rode hard, putting miles between them and Rattler's Gorge, the heavy bag of gold a tangible symbol of their strike. They hadn't killed Silas, but they'd humiliated him,
stolen a fortune from Bracken and proven they could hit him hard. And Arlen had seen the shock in Silas's eyes. The ghost had returned. Back in Flickertown, hidden deep in their canyon camp, they assessed the haul. It was substantial, enough to fund their war for a long time, but the victory felt hollow to Arlen. Silas was still breathing, Bracken was still powerful, and the fate of Serafina and KL remained a gnawing void. The payroll raid changed everything. Bracken's response was swift and brutal. Patrols doubled. Bounty posters appeared overnight in every settlement within 50 miles, crude sketches of Jonas Reed and a gray-cloaked woman, offering a small fortune in gold for their capture or proof of death. Silas Rourke's face was like thunder whenever seen, the easy confidence replaced by a hunted, furious intensity. He was personally leading search parties, scouring the territory.
The pressure forced Arlen and Elira deeper into the margins. They moved camp constantly, communicating only through trusted, discreet channels Elira had cultivated. They used the stolen gold carefully, buying information, supplies, and loyalty from those Bracken had wronged. A network of resentment began to quietly coalesce. A blacksmith whose son Bracken's men had killed in a drunken brawl. A storekeeper driven into ruin by Bracken's monopolies. Families who'd lost their land. They became the silent resistance, feeding information, providing safe haven, their hatred for Bracken and his treacherous lieutenant a unifying force. One crucial piece of information came from a grizzled trapper who frequented the high valleys near the Iron Crown Ranch. He spoke of a hidden valley, accessible only by a treacherous path known as the Widow's Walk, where Bracken kept prisoners, men who defied him or knew too much. "He don't kill 'em outright," the trapper wheezed, "just makes 'em disappear. Works 'em like dogs, breaking rock for some fool project of his. Guards call it the Stone Cage." Arlen's heart hammered against his ribs. Prisoners. Could Serafina and KL be there? Was it possible they survived the ambush Silas led them into? Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed amidst the ashes of his rage. He had to know. Scouting the Iron Crown Ranch was suicide. It was a fortress, nestled in a high basin, surrounded by watchtowers and patrols. The Widow's Walk was said to be guarded day and night. A direct assault was impossible. They needed a distraction, something massive enough to draw Bracken's forces and Silas's attention away from the prison valley. Elira studied maps, her brow furrowed. Bracken's pride is his prize bull herd, hundreds of head, pure-blood crimson horns, worth a king's ransom, kept in the prime grazing land south of the main house near the river. A plan formed, desperate and audacious. If they could stampede the crimson horns right through the heart of Bracken's ranch, the chaos would be unimaginable. It would pull every available man towards the main compound, hopefully including the guards from the Widow's Walk. It was their only shot. Gathering their scattered allies took days. Whispered messages, covert meetings in abandoned line shacks. They assembled a small, determined group. The blacksmith, Harkin, strong as an ox. The storekeeper, Lem, surprisingly agile. Two former Bracken cowboys who'd been cheated of wages, Dirk and Finn, and Elira and Arlen. 6 against an empire. The plan was precision and timing. Under cover of the deepest night, they would infiltrate the southern pastures. Harkin and Lem would cut the main corral fences silently. Dirk and Finn, expert horsemen and ropers, would create controlled chaos among the herd, spooking them without causing a panicked rout too early. Elira, the best shot, would take a high position to cover their retreat and provide distraction if needed. Arlen would lead the group targeting the Widow's Walk once the stampede began.
The night was moonless, perfect for shadows. They moved like ghosts through the rough terrain surrounding the Iron Crown Basin. Reaching the perimeter fence was tense. They cut the wire carefully, slipping through. The scent of cattle and hay filled the air.
The bulk of the main ranch house and outbuildings loomed in the distance, lit by scattered lanterns. Harkin and Lem melted toward the main holding corrals. Dirk and Finn moved to flank the edges of the vast herd, dark shapes barely visible against the darker ground. Arlen and Elira found a rocky outcrop overlooking the scene. Elira settled with her rifle. Arlen checked his peacemaker, the weight heavy with anticipation. Minutes crawled by. Then a low whistle. Harkin's signal. Fence wires twanged softly as they were cut. Almost immediately, Dirk and Finn began their work. They didn't yell. They used coiled ropes, snapping them near the lead bulls, creating sharp cracks that startled the animals. They moved deliberately, channeling the growing unease of the herd toward the open fence lines. It started slowly. A few steers shifted nervously. Then a bull snorted, pawed the ground. The cracks of the ropes became more frequent. Unease turned to agitation. A young bull broke towards the opening, then another. Like a dam cracking, the movement became a flow, then a torrent. The ground began to tremble. Now, Arlen hissed. The stampede erupted. Hundreds of panicked crimson horns, tons of muscle and horn, surged through the broken fences, a thundering, bellowing tide of destruction. They didn't run randomly. The pressure from Dirk and Finn channeled them straight towards the heart of the ranch compound. The bunkhouses, the stables, the main house itself. Chaos erupted instantly. Shouts of alarm turned to screams of terror. Lanterns flared as men stumbled from buildings, confronted by the onrushing wall of beef. Gunshots rang out, futile against the tide, only adding to the panic. The thunder of hooves drowned out all other sound. Lights blazed in the main house. Bracken awakened. Arlen didn't wait. He signaled to Elira. "Cover the walk. We go." He slid down the rocks, meeting Harkin and Lem, who had doubled back. Together they sprinted towards the northern rim of the basin, where the trapper had described the entrance to the Widow's Walk, a narrow hidden crack in the cliff face, supposedly guarded. The distraction was total. Every man at the Iron Crown seemed focused on the apocalyptic scene unfolding at its center. They reached the base of the cliffs unseen. The entrance was indeed guarded, but only by two men, both staring slack-jawed towards the distant chaos and noise, their rifles slack in their hands. Arlen and Harkin moved with lethal silence. One guard crumpled from a rock to the head, Harkin's work. The other barely had time to turn before Arlen's pistol butt connected with his temple.
They dragged the guards into the shadows and entered the narrow fissure. It was dark, damp, and treacherous, winding steeply upwards. After a heart-pounding climb, they emerged into a hidden high valley, the Stone Cage. It was a grim place. Barren rock, a few crude wooden shacks, and a gaping mine entrance. A handful of ragged figures, chained together, shuffled under the watchful eyes of 3 more guards near the mine entrance. The guards, alerted by the distant commotion but unsure of its source, were arguing, looking towards the path Arlen had just climbed. Arlen scanned the prisoners desperately. Men, all men, gaunt and broken. His heart sank. No Serafina, no Kael. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. Had it all been for nothing? Were they truly gone? Then, movement near one of the shacks. The door opened slightly. A guard emerged, roughly dragging someone out. A figure, smaller than the men, stumbling. Long, matted hair, but even in the dim light, Arlen saw a flash of familiar red. Serafina. She looked thin, worn, her clothes ragged, but alive. Fury, white-hot and blinding, replaced despair. The guard shoved her towards the chained group. "Take the guards," Arlen whispered to Harkin and Lem, his voice a deadly calm. "Leave the one by the shack to me." Harkin and Lem moved like predators. They targeted the 3 guards near the mine entrance. One went down silently from Lem's thrown knife. The other two turned, raising rifles, but Harkin was already among them, his blacksmith's strength terrifying. Chaos erupted near the mine as prisoners scattered. The guard near the shack, startled by the sudden fight, turned away from Serafina, raising his rifle toward the commotion. It was his last mistake. Arlen Vance stepped from the shadows near the shack wall, his peacemaker level. The guard froze, eyes wide. "Drop it," Arlen commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. The guard hesitated, then let his rifle clatter to the ground. Arlen didn't take his eyes off him. "Serafina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Get behind me." "Harland," she whispered, disbelief and hope warring on her face. She stumbled towards him. The guard, seeing Arlen momentarily distracted by his wife, made a desperate lunge for a knife at his belt. Arlen didn't hesitate. The peacemaker roared once. The guard jerked backwards, collapsing. Arlen stepped over him, holstering his gun, and caught Serafina as she fell into his arms. She felt fragile, trembling, but alive, real. "Oh, Arlen," she sobbed into his shoulder. I knew you'd come." "Kyle?" Arlen asked urgently, holding her, scanning the panicked prisoners. "Where's Kyle?" Serafina pulled back, her face etched with fresh pain. He's not here, Arlen. Silas, when he brought us in, Bracken wanted leverage. He kept Kyle at the main house. Said as long as he had our boy, I'd work quietly." Her voice broke. "He's alive, Arlen, but Silas, he visits him, taunts him, tells him you're dead." Rage, colder and sharper than ever, surged through Arlen. Silas had taken his son, used him as a pawn. The debt kept mounting. He held Serafina tighter. "We're getting him back tonight." The fight at the mine entrance was over. Harkin and Lem stood over the downed guards. The prisoners, unchained by Lem, gathered around, wary but hopeful. "We need to move," Arlen stated, "now, while they're distracted." They helped the weakened prisoners, including Serafina. Elira joined them at the top of the Widow's Walk, having covered their retreat. "Stampede's still going," she reported grimly, "but Bracken's men are starting to contain it. We have minutes, maybe." They descended the treacherous path quickly, helping the freed prisoners. Reaching the bottom, they split up. Harkin and Lem would lead the freed men towards a prearranged safe haven in the hills. Elira, Arlen, and Serafina turned towards the still chaotic Iron Crown Ranch. Cale was there, in the lion's den. Using the lingering chaos as cover, buildings damaged by rampaging cattle, men still trying to round up strays, wounded being tended to, they slipped through the outskirts towards the main house. It was a sprawling stone structure, its lights blazing, guards posted, but visibly shaken and distracted. Serafina pointed to a smaller, sturdy building attached to the main house, the old spring house converted into a cell. "That's where they keep him, one guard usually, inside the door." They approached from the rear, hidden by a smokehouse. Elira took position, rifle ready, covering the approach. Arlen and Lem moved to the heavy oak door of the spring house. Serafina gave a soft, specific knock, a signal she'd been forced to use. A gruff voice came from inside. "Who is it?" "Me," Serafina called, her voice steady despite the tremor Arlen felt in her hand. "Bracken sent me, once the boy cleaned up." A grunt. Bolt slid back. The door opened a crack, revealing a burly guard. He saw Serafina, started to say, "He didn't tell me." Then he saw Arlen beside her, the peacemaker already rising. His eyes widened in recognition from the bounty posters. He fumbled for his sidearm. Arlen's shot was faster, a sharp crack in the confined space. The guard staggered back, crashing into a shelf of jars. Arlen pushed the door open, stepping inside. Serafina rushed past him. In a small, windowless room, chained to an iron ring in the wall, sat Cale. He was thinner, older than Arlen remembered, his face pale but his eyes blazing with defiance that vanished into stunned disbelief as he saw his mother, then his father. "Pa?" he choked out.
Arlen was at his side in 2 strides, using the guard's keys to unlock the heavy manacle. He pulled his son into a fierce embrace, the feel of him solid and alive, washing over Arlen like a cleansing flood. "I'm here, son. I'm here." There was no time for reunion. Shouts outside. The shot had been heard. Elira fired from her position, her rifle echoing. "Arlen, company!"
They burst out of the spring house. 3 Bracken men were running towards them, guns drawn. Elira dropped one with her rifle. Arlen fired the peacemaker twice. One man spun, clutching his shoulder. The other dove for cover. Serafina grabbed a fallen guard's pistol, her hand steady, firing towards the 3rd man, forcing him back. "To the horses!" Arlen yelled, pushing Kale towards the stables where they'd hidden their mounts earlier. They ran, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Elira covered their retreat, her rifle spitting fire. They reached the corral behind the stables. Their horses were there, saddled thanks to Elira's foresight. They mounted swiftly. Arlen pulled Kale up behind him. Serafina mounted her own horse with surprising agility. Elira vaulted onto hers, firing a last shot towards their pursuers. "Ride!" Arlen spurred his horse. They thundered out of the corral, away from the blazing lights and chaos of the Iron Crown Ranch, heading for the open darkness of the high country. They rode until the horses were lathered and dawn painted the eastern sky in pale streaks. Finding a secluded box canyon, they finally stopped, exhaustion and elation warring within them. Serafina held Kale tightly, tears streaming down her face. Arlen watched them, the weight of the last months threatening to crush him, tempered only by the overwhelming relief of having them back. But the relief was short-lived. Kale, after the initial joy, grew quiet, his young face shadowed. "Pa," he said, his voice small. "Silas. He came often, talked. He said, you were weak, that you got Ma and me killed through your stubbornness, that Bracken was the future." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "He laughed, Pa, when he talked about the fire, about the barn exploding." Arlen felt the cold knot of vengeance tighten in his gut again. Silas hadn't just betrayed him. He'd poisoned his son's mind, twisted his grief. He put a hand on Kale's shoulder. "He lied, son, about everything. He chose greed and power over family, over us." Elira approached, her expression grim. "We hurt them, badly. The stampede, the prison break, the payroll. Bracken is wounded. But Silas, he won't stop. He'll come for us, for all of us, especially now." Arlen knew she was right. The game had changed. He had his family back, but the threat remained. Silas Rourke was still out there, a cornered, dangerous animal, and Torrin Bracken, humiliated and enraged, would unleash his full fury. The open war he'd avoided was now inevitable. He looked at Serafina, at Kale, then at Elira. They had survived. They were together, but the final reckoning with Silas was coming. The ghost had not only returned, he had brought fire and steel, and he would have his due. The stolen Bracken gold bought them time in a hidden valley far to the west, near the Singing Canyons. It was a harsh but defensible place, with water and grazing. The freed prisoners from the stone cage, along with Harkin, Lem, Dirk, Finn, and others who joined their cause, formed a small, determined community. They built shelters, tended hidden gardens, trained. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress preparing for siege. Serafina nursed Kale back to health, the haunted look slowly fading from his eyes, replaced by a hard-earned resilience. Arlen spent hours with him, teaching him not just to shoot and track, but to understand the land, to think, to see the traps men like Silas laid. News filtered in slowly. Bracken was furious, offering even larger bounties. His empire was rattled. Smaller ranchers, emboldened by the blow to the Iron Crown, were resisting more openly. Supplies were harder to get, men were jumpy. But Silas Rourke was relentless. He was hunting, methodically, ruthlessly.
He knew Arlen was alive, knew he had Serafina and Kale back, and it seemed to consume him. He led brutal sweeps through the territory, burning suspected sympathizers' homesteads, interrogating with fists and threats. He was closing in. Elira, their eyes and ears in the outside world, returned one evening with a troubled expression. "He found Durnholder," she said quietly. "The rancher who held out after we diverted the cattle. Silas rode in yesterday, burned him out. Halder resisted. Silas shot him down in front of his wife and kids. Made an example." Arlen closed his eyes. Another life destroyed by Silas's treachery. The debt grew heavier. "He's drawing us out, trying to force a confrontation on his terms." "We can't let him keep doing this," Serafina said, her voice steel. She was no longer the captive. She was the woman who'd endured the stone cage. "He uses fear like a weapon. We have to stop him, Arlen, not just for us, for Halder, for everyone he's crushed." Kale looked up from cleaning his newly acquired rifle, a youth-sized prairie hawk. "He wants you, Pa. He thinks you're hiding, thinks you're scared." There was no accusation in Kale's voice, just a cold observation. Arlen knew Kale was right. Silas believed Arlen was broken by the initial betrayal, only capable of hit-and-run tactics. He believed the family man was weak. Silas needed to see Arlen broken again, finally and completely. That arrogance was his weakness. "He wants a reckoning?" Arlen said, his voice low and dangerous. "Fine, we'll give him one, but not on his ground, on ours." The plan was simple, brutal, and hinged on Silas's own nature. They chose the place, Sundered Rock, a massive, isolated mesa rising from the desert floor, its top accessible only by a single, narrow switchback trail. It was defensible, offering a clear view for miles, but also a potential trap. They sent a message, delivered anonymously to a Bracken saloon frequented by Silas's men. "Vance waits at Sundered Rock. Come alone if you dare, or send your dogs. He'll be waiting." It was a direct challenge, playing on Silas's pride, his need to prove himself superior, to finish what he started. They knew he wouldn't come alone, but he might come with fewer men, confident he could handle Arlen.
Preparations began. They stockpiled water and food on the mesa top. They positioned Elira and her rifle, along with Dirk and Finn, hidden among the boulders flanking the base of the trail, ready to ambush any large force Silas brought. Harkin and Lem prepared defenses at the top, piles of rocks ready to be rolled, narrow points where one man could hold off many. Serafina and Kale would be at the top, armed and ready. Arlen would meet Silas on the trail. 3 days later, dust signaled riders. Not a small group, but not an army either. 10 men, riding hard. At their head, unmistakable even at a distance, was Silas Rourke. He'd taken the bait, but brought enough muscle to feel secure. They reined in at the base of Sundered Rock, staring up the daunting trail. Silas dismounted, his hand resting on his gun, his face a mask of cold anticipation. "Vance!" his voice echoed up the rock face. "You wanted a reckoning? Come down and face me! Or are you still hiding behind rocks and shadows?" Arlen stepped into view halfway up the trail, silhouetted against the sky. "I'm right here, Silas, just like I was at the Waystone. Only this time, you're the one walking into the fire." His voice carried clearly, calm and steady. "Send your men away, Silas. This is between us, brother to brother." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Brother! You lost that right when you turned outlaw. You think this is about the past? This is about you defying Bracken, defying me!" He gestured to his men. "Take him! Bring me his head!" The Bracken riders spurred their horses up the narrow trail. It was their first mistake. The trail was too steep, too treacherous for a mounted charge. As the first riders reached the halfway point where Arlen stood, he simply stepped aside into a crevice. Above, Harkin and Lem heaved. Boulders, carefully loosened, crashed down the trail. Horses screamed, riders were thrown. Chaos erupted. At the same moment, Elira, Dirk, and Finn opened fire from their concealed positions at the base, targeting the men Silas had left holding the horses. Surprise was total. Within minutes, the assault was shattered. Several riders were down, injured or unhorsed. Others scrambled for cover at the base, pinned by fire from above and below. Silas, exposed near his own horse, drew his pistol, firing wildly towards Elira's position. Arlen emerged from the crevice. Most of Silas's men were neutralized or disorganized. He walked calmly down the trail towards the chaos at the base. Still sending others to do your dirty work, Silas? Still hiding behind Bracken's money and hired guns? Or are you finally man enough to face what you did? Silas, enraged and seeing his men routed, turned his fury on Arlen. You think you've won? He screamed, firing up the slope. The shots went wide. You're a dead man, Vance! You and your whole filthy brood! He started scrambling up the trail on foot, abandoning cover, driven by pure hatred. Arlen stopped, waiting. He holstered his peacemaker. Silas climbed, panting, his face contorted, his own gun held ready. He reached the level spot where Arlen stood. They were 10 feet apart, the wreckage of the ambush below them, the mesa rising behind Arlen. Look at you, he spat, breathing heavily, playing the hero. After all you've cost me. Bracken demoted me because of you, because of your interference. You ruined everything.
I ruined everything? Arlen's voice was dangerously quiet. You murdered my family, Silas. You burned our home. You sold your soul to Bracken. For what? A title? A bigger share? For the future, Silas roared. For power. You were content to scrape by in the dirt, Arlen. I wanted more. The Waystone was just the beginning. Bracken offered a kingdom. And you were always in the way, with your morals, your family. He spat the word like poison. They made you weak, holding you back, holding me back. Arlen shook his head slowly, a profound sadness mingling with the fury. You were my brother, Silas. I trusted you with my life, with theirs. He gestured towards the mesa top where Serafina and Kale now stood, visible, watching. You betrayed that. You chose greed over loyalty, over love. Silas's eyes flickered to Serafina and Kale, alive and defiant. A flicker of something, maybe shock, maybe rage, crossed his face. Then it hardened. Sentiment. That's your weakness, Arlen. Always was. He raised his pistol, steady now. And it's gonna get you killed. Again. He fired. Arlen was already moving. The bullet whined past his ear. Arlen didn't draw his gun. He lunged forward, not away. He crashed into Silas before he could fire again. They grappled on the narrow ledge, a tangle of limbs in fury. Silas was strong, fueled by hatred. He slammed Arlen against the rock face, trying to drive the breath from him. Arlen drove a knee into Silas's gut, making him grunt. They separated, panting. Silas swung his pistol like a club. Arlen ducked, the barrel whistling over his head. He drove a fist into Silas's ribs, hearing a satisfying crack. Silas staggered, but came back with a vicious backhand that split Arlen's lip. They traded blows, brutal and desperate, the years of friendship dissolving into primal violence. Below, the fighting had stopped. Allura and the others held their remaining Bracken men at bay, watching the personal duel unfold. Serafina held her breath, her hand gripping Kale's shoulder. Silas got an arm around Arlen's neck, squeezing. Shoulda stayed dead, he choked out. Arlen drove an elbow backwards into Silas's face. He felt bone crunch. Silas howled, releasing his grip. Arlen spun, driving a fist into Silas's jaw, sending him stumbling backwards toward the edge of the trail. Silas caught himself, his face a mask of blood and rage. He fumbled for his dropped pistol. Arlen didn't move. He stood between Silas and the precipice. It's over, Silas. Bracken's finished. His men are broken. His money's gone. You have nothing left. Silas found his pistol, raising it shakily. I have this! He aimed at Arlen's chest. Arlen didn't flinch. He looked Silas straight in the eye, the man he had once called brother.
Shoot me, Silas, if that's all you have left. But know this, even if you kill me, you've already lost. You lost the moment you lit that fuse in the Waystone barn. You lost your soul. You're just Bracken's rabid dog, and when he's done with you, he'll put you down too.
Silas's hand trembled. The hatred in his eyes warred with something else, a dawning horror. The realization of the desolation he'd wrought, the emptiness of Bracken's promised kingdom. He looked past Arlen, saw Seraphina and Kale watching, alive. He saw the wreckage of his men below. He saw the cold certainty in Arlen's eyes. The pistol wavered. "You were my brother," Arlen said softly, the words carrying the weight of a lifetime. "And you chose this." Something broke in Silas Rourke. Not fear, but a profound, crippling emptiness. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the rocks. He didn't look at Arlen, he looked down at the drop, a sheer fall to the boulders below. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a terrible, hollow defeat. Arlen didn't move. He wouldn't push him. He wouldn't execute him. Justice wasn't about becoming Silas. Justice was Silas facing the abyss he'd created and finding nothing but the void he'd chosen. Silas Rourke took one last shuddering breath. He didn't look at Arlen again. He simply stepped backwards, off the edge of the trail, into the empty air. There was no cry, just the sickening thud far below, echoing faintly in the sudden, stunned silence. Arlen stood at the edge, looking down at the broken figure far below. There was no triumph, only a vast, weary sadness. The rage that had sustained him for so long seeped away, leaving behind the scars and the hollow space where trust had once lived. He turned his back on the edge and walked towards his family. Seraphina met him halfway, wrapping his arms around him. Kale stood beside them, his young face solemn, understanding the terrible price of the vengeance they'd sought. Elira approached, her rifle lowered, her expression unreadable. Below, the remaining Bracken men, seeing Silas fall and their cause lost, threw down their weapons. The sun was setting, painting the singing canyons in hues of orange and purple, just like the day the Waystone burned. But this sunset felt different. It felt like an ending, harsh and brutal, but also like a beginning. The ghost of Arlen Vance could finally rest. The debt was paid, not in the way he'd imagined, but in the only way that truly mattered. Silas Rourke had faced the consequences of his betrayal and found them unbearable. And Arlen Vance had walked away, not with clean hands, but with his soul and his family intact. The dust of sundered rocks settled, marking the end of one long trail of vengeance and the uncertain start of another journey under the vast, watchful sky of the Wild West.